Everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. We are having a conversation with the director and editor of A Case for Love, our blockbuster movie heading to theaters for one day only on January 23rd, and we are absolutely thrilled. It's a message we all need right now, and as communicators, we have the special chance to help spread that message. So I'm Christine McTaggart. I'm the Communications Director for the Diocese of North Carolina and the co-chair of the Episcopal Communicators Professional Development Committee. Without further ado, I'm going to step aside and turn it over to the Episcopal Communicator Board Chair and moderator for today, Alan Yarborough. Alan?
Thanks so much, Christine. Really excited to be here for this program for the upcoming film, A Case for Love. We wanted to offer Episcopal communicators, members, and the broader church community a chance to hear from those involved in the film. So grateful for the Grace-Based Films partnership here that made today's program possible, and thrilled to be able to invite Brian and Xenia here to teach us about what this film is and some of the behind the scenes pieces that might be useful for your own work in Episcopal communications. So just as a quick sort of introductory piece, Brian, we'll start with you, and then Xenia. I'd love to hear you all introduce yourselves briefly and the role that you played for the film.
Absolutely. So my name is Brian Ide. I live in Los Angeles. I attend All Saints Beverly Hills for the last 20 some odd years, and I am the director and one of the producers of the film.
Awesome. Xenia.
Hi, my name is Xenia Leblanc, and I'm the editor of A Case for Love. Brian and I met about 2 years ago and really connected on this project, and it was such a joy to work and create alongside him. I'm really grateful.
Awesome. Wonderful. So I'm curious, a couple of maybe general questions, about the film, knowing folks haven't seen it yet, and we're getting ready for the day in theaters, and I think there's some screenings being organized as well. But this is sort of a big step in what I'm sure has been a longer process to get here. So thinking way back, sort of beginning of the project, I'd love to hear about what prompted this film. How did the ball get rolling to turn this into something more tangible?
Sure. So I'll go quickly even a step further back from that to do the genesis of the whole ministry. So like I said, I attend All Saints Beverly Hills, and maybe 8 or 9 years ago was invited to be on the vestry of the church. And as we all know, those conversations are usually financial based and stewardship shortfalls and pledging and all those things. And I don't have gifts in that space. And my now co-founder of Grace-Based Films had a financial background, and he was also a new member of the vestry at the time. And I thought, well, I could either spend the next 4 years rubber stamping his expertise in these meetings, or maybe we could stir up other gifts that we have in the parish. And because we are where we are, we just happen to have a lot of parishioners that are in the business of storytelling. And I was inspired by this notion that it felt like at the time that most of the content coming through Hollywood that had some faith-centric element to it was grounded in, if your faith was strong enough, then your football team won the game, or your marriage was reconciled, or you found healing. And I thought that, like, that's amazing if that is your journey, but that wasn't my journey and the journey of a lot of people I knew. So we thought, well, maybe we could start telling messier, more complicated faith stories. And so we started with a little short film called Reconcile. The theme of that one was the challenge of loving the other in our lives, and everybody's other is different. So we made that one and had a wonderful Q&A afterwards, and the people from the National Church came out and sent it to all the bishops, and the response was such that we thought, okay, maybe we're onto something. So then we pivoted to the next leap of faith, which was a feature film called This Day Forward, and the theme of that one was facing the unimaginable on a faith journey. And we ended up touring all over the country with that, and overseas in Australia. And then we thought we knew what the next film was going to be. We had been in the Holy Land in 2019 a couple of times, and we had this story developing in our mind. And then we were at CEAP, then CEAP, in the infamous 2020 CEAP. And while we were there talking about ideas and how we might get this up and running, Ken and Chuck Robertson from the National Office of Staff is a lover of story too. And we were talking about things, and he said, well, that sounds like a really great story and something that would be really interesting. But if you're going to activate this in the national church, like they're not going to know who you are. So have you ever thought about a documentary? And he said, Bishop Curry was writing this book, and it was half, as we all know, half his life, half his message. And I think there was interest in this notion that as humanity, we have to start living into this idea of unselfish love. And we can preach about it and we can write about it in books, but what does it actually look like in the real world? And I think there was interest in partnering with people that were grounded in faith and grounded in the Episcopal tradition, but also were outside of that. So hopefully the story could be told in a way that would also speak to people outside of parishes and sanctuaries. So we said, of course, that'd be amazing. And then 10 days later, COVID hits and the whole world blows up, and so did the project. And then 6 months later, we reconnected and said, okay, I think we're stable enough. Let's revisit this. And so that started in 2021.
Nice.
But that's kind of the genesis of where it came from.
Yeah, yeah. And Xenia, how did you come in? What was your sort of trajectory with the project?
I was really lucky to be introduced to Brian by a mutual acquaintance of ours, and I am a filmmaker, so I do a lot of different projects, and I was really excited because this film, as soon as Brian and I met over Zoom for the first time, it felt like we connected, and I was really excited to hear that this film is going to be meaningful and it's going to portray stories of real people. And I honestly felt very excited. And we started off with a promo, actually. So first we did a 25-minute promo. We got to know each other a little bit, and Brian got to see a little bit of my work and my voice in it. And then from there, I was sitting and just kind of hoping that Brian would pick me as the editor of the film, because I got so excited looking at all of this material. I received a huge hard drive with a bunch of interviews and a lot of hours and hours and hours of footage. And just by looking at it and seeing how real it was and how it spoke to me and how I felt it would speak to others, I was really excited to come on board and to make a story out of it and shape it into a story. And it was really intimidating, but it was a great journey. And again, I'm really grateful that I met Brian, and Brian and I speak the same language, I feel. So that was really great.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, and it's to get a bit more tangible with the film, we've been hearing, of course, from Presiding Bishop Michael Curry. It's all about love. We've had the Way of Love, initiative. He's really centered to that word, and of course, title "A Case for Love" gives us some indication of the content, of the film. But without giving too much away, what can viewers expect? What are we in store for, when we engage with this film from the audience perspective?
One of the conversations I had early in the process that changed the way that I went about creating it was I was sitting with a friend in Los Angeles who is a very successful writer and producer. And he said, okay, you have this notion of unselfish love, and you have this ordained person in a collar. The audience is already going to come to it without seeing anything, saying, I already know what this thing is. So he said, your job is to always come at it with this notion of like, oh, you thought it was this, it's actually this. And that drove how we wanted to craft it. And so it was really important to me that the bulk of this film was centered on ordinary people, because we wanted ordinary people to see it and hopefully be inspired or moved and feel like, okay, if they can do it, then I can do it. If we had just remarkable CEOs and founders of organizations, it would be, oh, that's great, good for them, but not for me. So that was really important. So 95% of the film are these 14 deep dive stories that are woven together into 7 chapters, usually 2 or maybe 3 at a time. And each of the chapters have a universal theme to them. And it could be love and loss, or exclusion, or being dealt a difficult hand in life, or answering the call, or hope. And there are a really wonderful range. None of these people are experts on love. We didn't choose them because they're the smartest or the best. We just got 8 people into 3 vans in a time when the world was not engaging with each other anymore because of COVID. And it was a chance to be with people again. And So it's a journey story. So the bulk of it are those 14 stories woven together. And they cross really difficult stories of people who were sexually trafficked by their parents when they were younger, all the way to really simple, uplifting stories of people who cook food and just love to minister through food and everything in between. So that's the bulk of it. We then did 200, 250 man on the street interviews where we just pulled over on the side of the road or in a farm in Pennsylvania or on the Brooklyn Bridge or downtown Indianapolis or all over the place and just asked people spontaneously, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the words unselfish love? Where have you seen it? Where have you seen its absence in the world? Those were probably my most favorite pieces of the journey. And then we have 14 or so cameos that do a beautiful job of succinctly saying what the deeper dive stories allow us to kind of slowly unpack. And we have politicians like Pete Buttigieg and Jim Clyburn and John Danforth. We have actors like Sam Waterston, rabbi leaders, Muslim leaders, organization leaders. And then at the end of the day, after all of that, we got to sit down with Bishop Curry and say, okay, like this is what we saw. What does this mean? And as we all know, Bishop Curry lands the plane very well. That is a gift.
You also got to get an insight into his life as well, which was great.
Yes,
that was
that's exactly right.
Wow.
His journey too, which was very, very gripping.
We had access to him in a unique way because of COVID and because there wasn't as much travel. So we could go to him and go behind the scenes and see him as the person and not just as this role of this denomination. And it humanizes his perspective, I think, to viewers.
Sure. Wow, really cool. Do you have Xenia, anything to add from your perspective?
Yeah, I just want to say that Brian is incredible at making people feel comfortable and make them open up and share their stories. And it really, honestly, is almost, you can feel it in those stories. You can feel that people open up. So even people on the street, you would think, you know, sometimes would feel uncomfortable or might want to close off. And what I loved seeing is how Brian made people just themselves, and he allowed them to be themselves and to share their stories and to share their feelings. So this film is full of that real deep connection, and I feel anyone that watches it would feel like we were at one of the screenings and you could feel that people connect on a different level. That's one of the most beautiful things about this film.
Yeah, that's really, I appreciate that. And sort of imagine, you know, the film being this wonderful intersection of the Episcopal Church and all these traditions that we have in our faith, but then the secular world that sometimes, you know, feels and can be so separate, and to be able to bring some of these themes, even in just the process, much less having the product at the end, you know, that we all can enjoy and use, even just the process being meaningful. Is intriguing and enticing to me. You know, that I really appreciate that. So knowing we've got, you know, an audience of communicators here, I'd love to dig a bit deeper into really two different aspects of this. The first, the storytelling piece, and then kind of video editing, technical pieces. We've got some video professionals in Episcopal communicator land. So let's keep with the storytelling piece. I think that's maybe where our thread is at the moment. And my first angle was about collecting the stories. Xenia, you mentioned you kind of received the video and then turned it into something. So I want to get to that. But first, want to ask, what was the story collecting like? I wonder if you could elaborate on that a bit more.
Brian, did you want to start?
Yeah. It was important to me. The documentary is very different from what I've had to do in the past. And normally in a scripted film, you're like, okay, we know Joe is going to say this line and Susan's going to say this line, and we scheduled it for Tuesday, and there, you know, then we edit it together. We've already agreed on where this thing is going. And as we were trying to plan out what we thought this story might be, I realized that it would be very easy to preconceive an idea and then formulate the way we interact with people to just support that idea. And I really wanted to get away from that notion. I did not want this to be propaganda. I did not want this to be seen as a bias towards anything, but instead a kind of a human story. And so as I went into the deep dive stories, I only had one question, and we were with them for a day. We interviewed them the entire day. And I had one question that started every interview, which is, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you had unselfish love, when you think of that? And then everything else through that day for me was, okay, now where do you need to go? And I think that was when we started to feel the skepticism and the uncertainty lower and the vulnerability increase. And I think they quickly realized that we weren't there to get them to say manufactured things to support whatever it is that Brian wanted to do. And then the most beautiful things were shared because of that. And we were in people's homes and we have a camera. I mean, I've used a variety of cameras and certainly in churches, and they're usually small. Well, this is a huge thing with gear, and we're right in front of people's face with sound things, and like trust becomes hugely important in that process. And I think once it happens, it just transforms. So that creates a logistical problem for the editor because you end up with an enormous amount of footage. I think we have somewhere between 300 and 400,000 words that we collected without a script. But it also meant that there are moments in there every day that I was done in a deep dive interview. If I felt like if I could walk away with, okay, somebody's going to be engaged with this by itself, then we were in good shape. The process with the Men on the Street was very similar. We had even less time to create trust. And I think for Men on the Street people, you walk up to them, and we've all seen the Borat, movies or the headlines. And you're like, okay, these people are going to make me look stupid, and I'm not going to be any part of that. But again, I think when they realized that we were who we said we were, and our goal was what we said it was, again, the trust and the vulnerability were impacted by that. And across the board, especially with the Men on the Streets, there was a notion of, like, you want to know what I think? Like, nobody ever asked me what I think. And I was just walking to get lunch, or I'm homeless, or whatever that was. And with that came some of the most remarkable things that were shared on the side of a road with complete strangers from all over the country. So I think about that a lot as I worked a little bit in the communications at our parish during COVID, and trying to, it's easier said than done, but I think there's such pressure sometimes to, okay, we got to make ourselves look good. I got to make the parish look good, or that we're thriving, or that we're this, that, and the other thing. And I think we're living in a world now where, like, people are expecting that, and we starting to gloss over it a little bit. And when we can reveal people or journeys or expectations differently than what the assumptions are, then I think people lean in differently. And I think people are, one little side bit to this, when we did the last film and we were traveled all over the place, and we had screenings, and then we stayed for the screenings and we talked after the screenings, and across the board, the response from so many people as we traveled was, they had that same feeling that, listen, the stuff I'm seeing, whether it was in Hollywood or in my parish, is that it's buttoned up. Like it's got a happy ending, all is well, the church is well, Susie's well. And I think there's this internalization that if it's not happening for me, then there must be something flawed with me or with my faith. And we heard that night after night. And so I think allowing ourselves to be a little messier and can go a long way towards people like leaning in and participating in different ways. And that was certainly part of the story collection goal for this.
Well, I mean, in what you shared, it sounds like authenticity is sort of the product of this process. That ultimately creates hopefully something, more compelling, and something we can connect to. And so I appreciate you going through part of what set up that authenticity, what created it. The ability to build trust being important, as videographers or people interested in capturing the story of our parishes or the communities that we work in. Hopefully that is really helpful to me as I think about, work ahead this year, and in an election year, some of the work I do in civil discourse. I mean, what you just described and the lessons there, I think resonate in a lot of this communication work. I don't know if in terms of collecting stories, certainly come back to that question, Xenia, but I'd love to ask alongside, about the video editing process. You both have mentioned, a lot of material beyond what ends up in the film, probably hour and a half, 2 hour film, but so many more hours beyond that. So, thinking about our communicators audience here, how did you approach those stories? What were some of the what was some of the capacity that you came into this with in terms of editing?
Yeah, I just want to say as well to what Brian was talking about, how people open up and they talk about their stories, they share their stories, and they're very vulnerable. One of the challenges and my biggest fear was that, once you start editing, you start creating it and shaping a story, and it's very easy to get carried away and to shape it into something else because there's so many tools available when you're editing. A good editor can make an actor a better actor. So for me, it was important to maintain that as much as possible, to focus on authenticity and to make sure that everything that we choose serves the story. And there was so much that was left out, not because it wasn't worthy of being there, but because otherwise the film would be 4 or 5 hours long. So I felt one of the challenges that I had and how I approached it was just by sitting down and giving my full attention to the story and to listen to what the person in front of me was talking about if I met them for the first time. And then I made notes of moments that I felt were very compelling or something that I mean, everything was very compelling, but I tried to choose the ones that were the most compelling and made notes for myself. And then on paper, I would construct a little bit of a story, who that is, where did they start off, where did they go next, what happened there, sort of like, a little bit of a flow of how the story would progress, what kind of challenges came across, and then what was the resolution of the story towards the end. So that was the first step, is just to kind of write it out and to see if that story folds and shapes together in a way that's very gripping, or it's not, gripping is a bad word. It's not trying to be something more than it is, but it's trying to be very clear, because sometimes people would share their stories and, they would veer off into something else or a side note or something like that. So it's just getting the main point across, but also showing who those people really were. Just what are we trying to say with those stories? What are we trying to hear and to understand from their stories? So, and then Brian and I would go through and kind of discuss what we thought was really important to hear, what could be left out if we have to make that choice, and we had to. And then I think the most interesting part for me was combining the stories. Like Brian said, in each of the chapters, we have 2 or 3 stories sometimes. And for me, it was interesting to find those bridges and connections in which those stories could intertwine, even though they were different. But what was amazing and magical, as I told Brian, is that there was always some point of connection in those stories that just fell together naturally if you just listened. There's a great moment there where one of the characters talks about one of the people talks about loving pizza, and there we go. And all of a sudden, the other story is about this beautiful, amazing lady who makes pizza for her neighborhood, and she loves making pizza. But this was not planned. And I would ask Brian and say, is that something that you planned? Is that something that you did on purpose? He's like, no, it's just the way people talk. So I feel this film, in a way, fell together by magic. Or Brian asked me, saying, how did you connect those things? And I honestly cannot answer fully. I think just by listening and trying to sort through as much as possible, and also think about, how would I present this story if I was telling it to you or to anyone else? What would I start with? How would I present this person and talk about their life and let them expand upon that story? And then it's a very messy process. So there's no right way to do it. But I think the best way to do it would be to focus on what the person is talking about and making notes of that, and then trying to sit through all of that information and trying to make sure that we're not cutting anything important away. We're not making the person say something they're not saying. Because again, it's very easy to do with editing. And and Brian was the captain of this ship, which helps to navigate and to say, wow, this is going the right way, or hey, this sounds a little bit less of what I think the person was trying to say. So I think it's a collaborative process with a lot of trust and a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of trial and error on putting something together and then watching it and saying, okay, this doesn't work. What doesn't work? Let's take this out. Let's kind of like a puzzle piece, which you're constantly shifting in different pieces and shaping it together. And at some point it just falls together and you feel like, yes, this, if I have this feeling and Brian has this feeling, and it must be working. There's something there that you can, it's just more of an intuitive kind of feeling.
Sure. Brian, anything else to add on the editing piece? And I mean, and this is maybe too specific, but I'm thinking you mentioned having the chapters with their themes. Even something like, did you have those themes in mind first, and then you fit the stories in them, or did the themes come after?
The themes came after because we didn't know. I think
Yeah.
when we left, we started in Minneapolis, and when we left, we had 4 or 5 of the stories pre-scheduled. And then it really was the spirit guiding. If we were in Minneapolis and they found out we were going to Nashville, and they would say, oh, you have to talk to Tim Shaw. Let me see if that can happen. And so it was the gathering of that. And then afterwards, there was a strategic element of, okay, which stories would make sense together. But there's also, from the Hollywood perspective of, okay, if the assumption is that this is some soft, lovey-dovey, sentimental thing, then let's start with Tim Shaw, the ALS NFL player, and Sheila, the Thistle Farms, sexually trafficked woman, and right away let the viewer know of like, okay, we're going to be going on a kind of a journey here that you may not have expected. And so we did create an arc with those stories that the middle of it was kind of the palate cleanser. So we, was the pleasant one, and then we work our way to some really powerful ones at the end, and then strategically use our cameos. So there was strategy in there too, in addition to the storytelling part.
Sure. Yeah, so I've got a couple of questions left, but want to remind our audience to please submit questions you all have for our speakers today. You can use the Q&A feature here in the Zoom webinar format. So, thinking about the intro to the film, you've talked about the chapters, individual stories, and that focus. But there's also, a larger context that these stories exist in, and that this movie exists in. And I think both of you talking about the connection that comes through in these stories feels to me so refreshing as I look at a fairly daunting year ahead. I think many of us are feeling that way. And there's, footage at the beginning showcasing the context, whether it's U.S. national context, some global, in which these people's stories exist. So I'd love to hear from you. How did you approach, that material? What did you want to convey with the decisions that went behind that piece of the film?
Well, big picture, I felt in the creation of this that we never wanted to have the antagonist be somebody or this group. I think it becomes very easy to let our own biases start to dictate our storytelling. And we didn't want that to be the case. And I felt like the societal ills that we're all experiencing together, that's the antagonist that each of us universally are sharing together. It doesn't matter where we are on the spectrum, politically or socially or, spiritually, like we're all still experiencing the division and the isolation and all of those things. So it was, okay, how do we acknowledge that without being fear-based in it? Just speak the truth very quickly into this is what we're all experiencing right now and set the tone for that. And I think Hollywood has a tendency to push those to like the world is burning down, and and that's what gets people to buy tickets, and so we didn't want to go there, but we also had to own this universality of the world we're living in. And so very early on we did that, and Xenia did a really beautiful way of collecting those. But that was the reason for that, was like, let's make sure we start on the footing that we're all in this together. And you're not going to watch this and feel like you're wrong. Like that was really important to me too. And we have, those are trigger things in the beginning, but there's some stories in there that are trigger points for people, if wherever they are on racial justice or sexual identity or immigration or whatever. But at the end of the day, the story isn't about that. And I think what we've heard from people in the screenings leading up to this is that the power of story, of somebody's intimate story, at the end of the day, it's just Bradley's story, it's not an LGBT story, is that if it is a trigger for you, the power of story is that it allows you to enter into somebody's world and be exposed to something that your natural life may not allow you to be exposed to. And then you can step back and wrestle with whatever that means for you. And I think that's what story can do, and then certainly what film can do with story in such a unique way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it sounds like humanization, humanizing each other, in a world and environment where I feel like dehumanization seems to be happening more and more. And that sort of is a tool to unlocking, I think, love, or maybe enacting love, thinking of love as a verb. Anything to add to that?
I would just add to that Bishop Curry speaks to that all the time, that it was very clear that when we say love, this is not a sentimental love. We're talking about a human condition. And I think that's why the way he speaks and the way he expresses this does resonate with so many people. And I think that's what I love, is that this is kind of a remarkable tool for the Episcopal Church without it looking like a tool for the Episcopal Church, is that I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of people saying, oh, like this is the place where these kinds of conversations are happening. And a lot of that credit goes to him for creating that space and that kind of tone. So I'm grateful that this becomes kind of this really beautiful evangelism tool in ways that we may not even realize for our denomination.
Sure.
Yeah, I think I would add that speaking from a technical standpoint as an editor, the reason for those clips as well is you can't, we talked about this a couple of times with Brian, that you can't talk about love without mentioning hate. So I think that those clips are not so much to pinpoint something or to show what's wrong, is as much as to convey the emotion of what we're all feeling and how difficult it's been over the past couple of years. And so it's there as a contrast to say that we all connect. We're not glossing over the conflict. It's there. We all feel it. It makes us feel a certain way. It makes us feel grief or anger or frustration or be feeling lost. And then we go into, I feel it's a great start. And we had different, we experimented with different openings with Brian. So we left the opening of the film for the very end of the process, of the creative process. After we've shaped the stories, first we shaped the stories, and then we went back to the opening to see how it speaks and how it sets up the tone for all of these stories to come afterwards. So yeah, so those clips, they weren't strategically chosen, but there was an element of we want to be honest in this film, and we want to talk about things that have happened. We're not going to point fingers or tell that who is responsible for this. We're just going to show it as is. And I think everyone can relate to that feeling. Everyone understands how difficult it's been. And from there, these stories hit even more because those are real people, and we're all in the same boat. We're all in the same boat together. Just listening to each other's stories makes us feel that, oh, I also feel that way. This is how I feel. This is just I feel this film is a breath of fresh air in that sense. It's you can relate and say, this is how I feel. I would love to connect on that level. I'm listening to a story that makes me feel like, oh, I'm also struggling. So, or maybe I'm not struggling and I'm seeing this and it makes me feel that, I feel so blessed with what I have, but at the same time, I understand how hard it must be for someone that I've never met, who lives in a different state or a different part of America. And yeah, this was the reason for that big setup, to make you feel like this is what we've all been bottling up this whole time. And now let's hear real stories. Let's share. Let's discuss. Let's talk about this.
Wonderful. Well, and we'll get to, I know there are a lot of resources you all pull together to help people do that. In addition to watching the film, also carrying out those conversations and these experiences and connection building. So we'll get there, but I want to turn to a few questions that we have coming in from our audience before we do that. What was the most challenging part of making this film?
Um, I think for me, it was like, this is a big topic, right? It would be very easy to say, okay, we're going to make a documentary about why social media is bad, and you line up 10 experts and, to reinforce that. But unselfish love, it means very different things to different people. And then you mix in expectations of people from the national church that are helping this become possible, with expectations of donors who are trying to make this possible, with expectations of a Netflix or movie theater companies. And they all have very different desires and approaches to that. And I think there's been a lot of sleepless nights trying to thread that line of, how do we do justice to all those needs and wants. And everybody would have told this story differently. At the end of the day, this is what my journey was and what I experienced, and it comes through my voice. But you would have told it differently in a really beautiful way, as would anybody else that's watching. And so I think fighting the insecurity of the process was probably the hardest part for me, because that inner voice, it's powerful. Like that fear that, like it is a powerful, dark thing. And I go to bed to it every night still. And so I think that the emotional part of that was way more difficult than the logistical.
Yeah, there's a big responsibility to storytelling.
Yeah.
Especially when it's others' stories. Xenia, how about you?
Well, speaking of looking at all of the material and connecting with it was one of the most challenging things for me personally. I had to step away sometimes and process what I saw, because it did impact me emotionally. It was so raw and real, and as Brian was saying, in storytelling of films in which everything is scripted, you know that this is being acted in front of you, so you kind of you connect if it's done beautifully and masterfully. But in this case, those are real people, and that's a real story. So for me, that was it was challenging to not disconnect from what I was seeing, because that was an element of, if I disconnect, I'll feel better. But if I disconnect, I'm not going to be able to tell the story well. So I would often call Brian and say, oh, this is a lot. I'm in tears. Yes, so that was, and of course, I laughed earlier because when you shape something like this, again, there's so many possibilities in which you can tell the story. And there is this element and difficulty of, you have to make a choice and commit to that choice. And you can't wonder forever if that's the right choice, or is it maybe if we chose it this and done it this way, maybe it would have been better. I think that's exactly what Brian was saying, is to commit to a choice, to commit to this way, and to let the film unfold and have a life of its own, and to see how others respond to it and how they react to it. But yes, relinquishing control of thinking, was there a better way to do this? Maybe if we did it that way, so eventually it's just saying, this is how we're going to do this. And Brian was amazing to work with on that, because Brian would say, yes, we're going that way. This is the direction we're taking. Okay, this is where we're going. Good. So I'm not doing it by myself. I'm doing it with someone. So that was very challenging.
Yeah. How has another question from the audience? How has the process of making the film changed your personal view on love?
Mhm.
I I would I would respond by saying that for me, it hasn't changed, but reinforced. I'm a hopeful person, so I think it would be hard to go into this work if you weren't hopeful. Otherwise, you could go a very different direction of the way that humanity is going. And I think that having lived in living in LA, and then COVID for LA was so intense, and our worlds became so small, that even as an open person from the Midwest with family that are red, white, blue, and purple and all, like, when your whole world is the headlines from your news source and your social media, like, eventually you start believing this stuff, because you don't have any human interaction to tell you otherwise. And so to be on the road again and just be in somebody's living room that we'd never met before all over the country was this breath of fresh air that like, okay, we are way more connected than the headlines want us to believe. And I think this journey has reinforced that for me.
Yeah. I think that for me, while I was working on this film, really helped me to go through a very difficult personal time. I'm not sure if, of course, you know about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and I come from Russia. My whole family's there. So for me, it was a very difficult time emotionally, and working on this film and hearing those stories felt like a gulp of water every day to help focus on someone else's story and to connect and work on something with a soul. That's something that helped me feel stronger and helped me feel that I can handle anything that comes along, and that we're all struggling in our own way. So for me, that was that.
Yeah. There are a couple of questions around sort of how the film impacted your faith, and one around, especially to you, Brian, how you ended up at All Saints. So I'm kind of maybe combining those and adding my own thought here. What is it about the Episcopal Church? You know, why? And Xenia, I don't know what your personal faith background is, and you don't necessarily need to divulge that, but obviously this project has connections to the Episcopal Church and you know, centers, Presiding Bishop Curry in particular, who's been such a wonderful voice for us. So I'd love to hear you all, you know, speak to that just a bit.
I have been blessed to have grown up. My father is a Lutheran, retired Lutheran pastor, ELCA Lutheran pastor. My mother is a devout Catholic. So we grew up as a family, all going to the Catholic church on Saturday and then all going to Lutheran church on Sunday. And then when I met my wife, she was an Episcopalian, and I grew up in Iowa, and I never heard the word Episcopalian. And then so my first experience was All Saints, and then it was All Saints at Holy Week. So it's hard to go anywhere else after you do Holy Week at All Saints. But what I'm grateful for is that I grew up in a faith journey that wasn't so dogmatic that it's my way or the highway. And I think that has informed this desire to bring people together, and especially through the lens of faith. And then I think that what I've realized in my time with the Episcopal Church is that I don't think this would have happened in the Catholic Church. And I don't think it would have in all of its beauty. And I don't think it would have happened in the Lutheran Church in all of its beauty. I think there is something about the uniqueness of this denomination and the journey that we're on, the messy journey, but the intellectual journey, and that made something like this possible. And I'm just incredibly grateful for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I was raised Orthodox in Russia, and I think I feel very blessed to have met Brian, who introduced me to the Episcopal Church, as I've never really, I've heard of it, but I didn't know that much about it. And I was really amazed at how welcoming I felt, and how, for me, this whole project felt magical in a sense of, as Brian said many times, Spirit guiding us through all of the steps. And I felt incredibly amazed at how beautiful everything came together, and how I became a part of that community through Brian and through numerous events that we've been a part of. And being introduced into this world for me really reinforced my feeling of connection, spiritually and emotionally. And it's something that I really, really cherish. And I felt incredibly lucky to have met Brian on my journey.
And Alan,
Great.
I'll just add something to that too, that one of the other blessings for me in this journey is it allowed me to get out of my own parish as my own lone experience to the Episcopal Church, and to be at these conferences. And now I'm on the road every day at dioceses and cities leading up to it. Over the last 3 years, you get to a place when you're in Virginia, and then all of a sudden you're in Florida and Texas, and you're like, oh, these are the things you all are doing or dealing with or experimenting with. And I want to keep bringing that back to our own kind of diocese and parish, but also into my belief that there are some remarkable things happening in the Episcopal Church that it would be easy, very easy not to know about in the day-to-day of trying to support, my own parish. So that has been a great part of the 3 years.
Nice. Yeah. Well, thank you for diving into, the film itself, y'all's expertise you each brought in, and then a little bit about your personal lives too. I appreciated your vulnerability there. So, speaking of letting people know about something, I figured we should wrap up here by talking about some of the resources, including how to see the film. One of the framings for a question in the chat is sort of, what is our mission? What is a communicator's mission? Listening to us, this program, what's our mission to help? Is it to push the theater? Is it to push discussion groups? Sort of what's the best way to get involved? And because I don't think everyone can see this particular question, the person added sort of even the initial question that you all asked each interviewee in the film, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear unselfish love? Maybe a way to frame programming around this. So let's start with the film itself. How do we see it? What are things communicators can do? And then turn to the additional resources.
Yeah. So historically, like we had said, Hollywood's relationship to faith has typically been centered around the evangelical world, because it's much easier for a church of 10,000 people to say, go watch something, and 10,000 people do. It's much harder to get the progressive denominations to do that. And so they just haven't lent the megaphone and the opportunity for denominations like ours to get a film, and especially theaters. Like, that's remarkable. So our push really is, like, Hollywood's looking to see what this engagement will be on January 23rd. The film is released by Fathom Events, which is owned by AMC, Regal, and Cinemark. And so their whole methodology is they give films that wouldn't normally get a theatrical release a single-day release to see how the nation responds. And so for us, it was January 23rd. So our whole focus for the last 5 months has been activating people to rally their friends and family or their parishes, that we get one shot at this. It will be available in other forms down the road, but many of those forms will be dictated by the success of the 23rd. And this film was funded by donors all across the country, and individuals and parishes and foundations. And so I don't own any of the profits from it. Bishop Curry doesn't own any of the profits from it. The people that funded it don't. They only go towards telling more stories. So my push for this is not somehow I'm going to line my pockets. It really is like, this is the chance for the Episcopal Church to gain some footing in this kind of powerful tool. So to make that possible, we are blessed because one of the members of your community has come on board. He saw an early version of it, Steve Hall from St. Michael and All Angels, who was there for many, many years. And he said, this is remarkable. Like, I want to bring, these are his words, his expertise in parishes. So how do we make it really easy for parishes to do this? Because they're already spread thin and exhausted and have a lot of demands on their time. So he created these beautiful posters that have opportunities with QR codes on it that, you could take your phone and buy tickets or watch the trailer. He created postcards for that. He created communications, press releases, all of those things. And they're on the website, acaseforlovemovie.com. And he's on this, and he'll probably add that to the chat. And there's a resources tab, and it's just a single yellow button download. And so all the tools that are social media tools or parish communications are already in there to make it really, really easy. And then what we also have is, one of the goals very early on was to not create a piece of media where you went and were entertained or moved for 2 hours and then you went back to life and that was it. So how do we start dialogue around this and action? And so a couple of things. One is, there's this push to launch this month of unselfish love on the 23rd, and to ask people for 30 days to intentionally seek out some active step they can take that day to spread this in the world, and then to journal about what that means and what that's experienced. And our CFO created that, and he's a very type A, list-oriented person, finance guy. And what he realized when he put it on his whiteboard is, by the 6th day, it became a habit. And what we've seen is, like, actions turn into habits and habits turn into change. And so there are also on the website, and I have hard copies here, Dwight Shiley, who is an Episcopal priest, married to an Episcopal priest, Blair Pogue, is also on staff at Luther Seminary. And they created the discussion guide that's for parishes. So it's beautifully designed by Steve Hall. The first part of it has questions that are based on the chapters that some churches are using for Lenten series or single Wednesday or Sunday nights. And then the second half of it is that journal that we talked about. Those are free. They're on the website too. You can download. There's a similar version that was created for students, 7th through 12th graders, that a national educator saw the film and said, okay, can I use my language? And pro bono, he created a student guide for young people to have those dialogue experiences in that way too. So all those things are on the website, acaseforlovemovie.com. I'm on the road, as I said, every day. I'm in New Orleans today. I go to Tallahassee tomorrow and then Fort Lauderdale, and we're going up into New York and DC and Indianapolis and Cincinnati and Iowa and Minnesota. And I have a carload of these. So if people, not everybody has the printing capabilities of a St. Michael and All Angels. And so we're donating these t-shirts. These are the crew t-shirts from the film. That's why I'm not dressed as nearly as nice as the rest of you. So we're just giving these things away to be as helpful as possible to parishes. And so they're there. And these posters, the last thing, this is my prompt. So these are 11 by 17 and they're really great. And then on the bottom of that, it's just a place where parents can say, oh, ours is at the Cinemark 14 on Hoover Street. And so these are, can be hung up in parishes and yoga studios and coffee shops. And so those are for free on the website as well.
Wonderful. Thank you for pulling that together, for your work. Steve, I know you're tuning in and sharing resources in the chat. So thank you for doing that as well. We will send an email out shortly after broadcasts, later on today or tomorrow, with the recording and the links that have been shared and discussed. But thank you all for this opportunity. Brian, Xenia, your work on the film, your time today to talk about it. Christine, thank you for hosting us and kicking us off as well. A couple of quick things from Episcopal communicators before we have closing remarks. We are a membership organization. If you are a member, please make sure your membership renewal is up to date. We just went through a season of renewal at the end of the year for many of us. If you're not a member already, I hope that you'll consider joining this wonderful ministry that connects people in the ministry of communications within the Episcopal Church. We also have more events like this coming up, including a broader event for the public, a webinar with the Episcopal Parish Network on January 18th about the importance of investing in communications. And then there are 2 chances to see us in person as well. We're co-sponsoring the pre-conference at the Episcopal Parish Network annual conference, the organization formerly known as SEEP, that you mentioned, Brian. We have some excellent program leaders who will continue in large part exploring storytelling. So this is a wonderful, just thematic connection and professional development connection for us as well today with what you two contributed to tie into the storytelling exploration there. Registration for that is open, and registration is also open for our Episcopal Communicators Conference, which will be in Portland, Maine, April 16th to 19th. So I'll drop links to all 3 of those things here in the chat, but again, we'll be sending that to everyone by email. Brian, Xenia, anything to leave folks with?
No, we're grateful, and we're grateful, for the ways that people are helping us spread the word. It works, and the ripple effects in social media and all of that works. And we look forward to seeing you at EPN. We'll be there as well.
Awesome. That'll be great.
Very grateful. Thank you.
Oh, last thing, I see Steve Hall just put, so there's about 800 or 900 theaters that already have the film. If you have a group that wants the film, you can see where they are on the website. If you have a group and there's not a theater in your town, but you have a group that wants to go, there's a connection on the website to reach out, and it goes right to Fathom, and they can often add a theater. So thank you, Steve, for pointing that out.
Awesome. Nice catch. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. We all take care. Be safe in the weather today. And we'll look forward to seeing you all in theaters later this month.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.